All right, let's get this thing started. Welcome to this week's installment of Stat Plus Conversations. It's a weekly video chat series exclusively for Stat Plus subscribers. Thanks for joining us. I'm Adam Feuerstein, senior writer for biotech here at Stat, and in a second I will be joined by my Readout Loud co-hosts. First, a few quick housekeeping items. We would like this to be very interactive. We want you guys to ask questions. We'll have some conversations here. It'd be great. The way you can do that is at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a few icons down there at the bottom of your screen. When you see the chat feature, that's something that you can use to chat amongst yourselves or send a message to the Stat team. But do not use the chat feature to ask us questions because we won't be monitoring that for questions. You'll see the Q&A button. That Q&A button, if you click on that, you can type a question into us. We will see it on our screens, and we will be able to read those questions to you, read those questions and answer them. The other thing is, and the best feature here is you'll see a raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, and that's where you can ask a question live. If you click that button, raise a hand, we'll see it. We'll click on you, we'll unmute you, and you can join us in conversation. With that, I'd like to introduce my co-hosts, Damien Gardet. He's national biotech reporter here at Stat, and Rebecca Robbins, the San Francisco correspondent for Stat. Hello, guys. How are you?
Hello.
Good to join you guys.
That was a long introduction. I apologize for that, but here we all are.
Adam, what are you drinking?
This is blue Gatorade. Yes, I think it's like Glacier Freeze. It's something my daughter and I are sort of addicted to, so there you go. It's a great color.
Well, I have some third wave coffee over here.
All right.
I don't get paid to endorse what I'm drinking, so I'm not going to mention it.
So I thought we would start off our discussion with a chat about sort of how we're living and working in the pandemic. We had been talking earlier about how things kind of feel different than they did back in March when the pandemic was taking off and there was so much uncertainty. So maybe Damien, do you want to start, like, how do you feel differently now compared to March?
I guess, I mean, at the outset of this, when we were getting used to the reality of needing to wear masks, of staggering trips to the grocery store, watching businesses close down, etc. It was surreal, and there was sort of a constant anxiety. And I think what I've learned over the ensuing 3 months is that constant anxiety just kind of becomes like the rhythm of your life. And so at any given moment, if I took a snapshot from walking down the street, seeing various masked people and boarded up businesses, 3 months ago, that would look like an apocalyptic scene. And now it's just like the neighborhood. So I don't know, I every now and again, I'll pause and reflect on, wow, this is insane. But in general, it's just become normal.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly something so weird can become normal. I think the biggest difference I've noticed is the uncertainty is gone. I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of uncertainty still with how things are going to play out in the coming months. But I think the spectrum of possibilities was wider in March. Like the outcomes could range from the virus going away quickly, as we've seen with other viruses in the past, or anything along the spectrum to like the apocalypse. And now I feel like the window of possibilities has narrowed.
Yeah, I mean, I rewatched Contagion early on. I think it was like early March when I rewatched Contagion with my daughter, and it was terrifying. And because it was like at that point there was so much unknown that we're like, wow, is this what it's going to be like? And I sort of joke about that, but I think I remember in those early days really like doing that whole doom scrolling thing through Twitter on the phone, and going to bed just very, very scared. I mean, honestly, sort of scared because you didn't really know what was happening. And I feel like as Damien said, it's sort of become a little bit normalized now, where I feel like today, even though the virus is still out there, I'm less afraid of it. And maybe I should still be equally afraid of it, but I feel like I've kind of gotten normalized to it a little bit, and I'm not as panicked as maybe I was in the beginning.
I was
So
going to
Adam,
say,
are you still washing down Amazon packages and groceries?
No, I mean, I think I did that originally in the beginning and probably like other people, but now I feel like I go to I mean, I wear a mask, I go to the grocery store, I wash my hands, I do all those things, but like I'm not disinfecting every package that comes into the house. Just I'm not doing that anymore.
I feel like the biggest change for me intellectually is, Adam, when you mentioned at the outset, a lot of our fear was based on the uncertainty of the science. We had seen what had happened in South Korea and what had happened in Italy, which were so different in terms of how the virus took hold in those countries. And we just had no idea what we were in store for in the United States. I feel like now we have a handle on what behavioral measures can limit the spread of the virus and contain things. So the terror is solely a behavioral one. Like my fears when I look at numbers from Texas and elsewhere is, will people do the right thing? Not what about this virus biologically do we not understand that might wreak havoc? So it is kind of just trading one anxiety for another in a lot of ways.
Now I see a bunch of you guys, a bunch of you folks in the chat and listening. We appreciate that. And like I said, ask a question, raise your hand. We'll call on you. This is like an AMA type of a thing. So we can talk about basically anything that you want to talk about. We don't have to talk about the coronavirus. We can talk about anything else. So, feel free to chime in. We've got a question, Damien. We'll start with a question. And I'll read it and you guys can answer it. You guys can see it too. Following the lead of Moderna, Gilead, and other companies in the COVID vaccine treatment race, do you think more non-COVID related companies will start to make more trial announcements via press releases and conference first with limited info instead of the traditional published literature? And I think that what the questioner is getting at is this idea that we've seen a lot of data released by press release. You guys, Damien, Rebecca, we've talked about this. And instead of sort of seeing things maybe more traditionally done, publishing in a paper or scientific journal or a medical meeting. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is something we've seen before COVID. There's certainly been a lot of attention and interest in this phenomenon in the COVID era, as information is being transmitted and shared so rapidly. But, I have to say, I've covered plenty of readouts, so to speak, in the past that were like press release readouts. And it's not until later that a company will actually present the findings at a medical meeting or in the published literature. I think the three of us have plenty of experience in this as well, that, the kind of amount of data that you get in a readout, even not a press release readout, but like a medical meeting readout with slides, is always going to be less than is ultimately presented in the published literature, months or even perhaps, could be a year later. So I think this has always been a phenomenon that we've had to deal with as reporters and have other consumers of this kind of information, investors, anyone following biotech. I do think, though, it'll be interesting to see how the kind of rush of information via preprints, via Twitter during the COVID era, whether that will kind of bleed into other disease areas. And I think it's hard to imagine that things will sort of slow down when people have gotten used to the way that information is being moved and shared.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's an opportunity. Data by press release has been so normalized in medicine and in biotech in particular that I often forget to complain about it. But now that the entire world is basically a biotech reporter with respect to waiting on results from these trials, and people have quite rightly pointed out that it's not ideal to just be going off of vague terms in a press release, I wonder if that steam continues and maybe there'll be pressure in non-pandemic times for companies developing drugs for cancer, diabetes, or whatever to be more forthcoming in their initial press releases than has been the case. That's an optimistic reading. It probably won't happen, but that'd be interesting.
All right, so I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, how about you, Adam? Curious if you have a take on this question.
I mean, again, I think we're, like both of you said, I think we're sort of used to it. And certainly Damien and I think are sort of accustomed to it because we deal with publicly traded companies. There's all those rules around material disclosure. So, we see these kinds of things more often than kind of, we have these debates among the staff, right? There's the people like Damien and I who routinely deal with publicly traded companies. We're used to it. And then we have people like Helen Branswell or Sharon Begley, who are some of our on the science side, right? They're used to getting things, getting information that's via published papers, right? And that's kind of the first way. So our world is sort of bleeding over into what Sharon and Helen do. And it is, I think it's sometimes a little bit of a shock to the system. They're like, what do you mean? And so we're sort of used to it. But I would hope that it would sort of normalize, I think, after maybe all this and this sort of rush to get information out because of the seriousness of COVID-19 ends, and then it goes back to normal. But we'll see. All right, I'm going to we're gonna bring Cody Powers onto the call. Cody, unmute yourself and ask away. Hello.
Yeah, I think I must have hit the button by accident. You just answered my question, so I think I'm good.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. That's okay. Well, let's take another question that's submitted by Q&A. Very interested in your prior conversation citing Jim Cramer's idea that typical sports gamblers have moved to day trading. Do you guys think that current interest in biotech, biopharma by quote unquote lay people will remain durable? Will bio continue to move markets in the next few years? Damien?
Well, for the first,
and that was Josh Brown who brought that up. It wasn't Jim Cramer, but maybe Jim also mentioned it.
I don't know. It seems fickle. I feel like, I don't know any day traders personally, so I'm just speaking based upon the strange screeds I see from anonymous Twitter users who kind of drift in and out of things. It does feel pretty temporal. It feels like either, when the pandemic subsides and there's just fewer headlines and less volatility in some of the biotech companies involved, that people will matriculate away, or the worst case scenario is there'll be some huge crash brought about by the failure of a vaccine or a safety event or something like that, and a bunch of people lose a bunch of money, and then we'll learn the lesson the hard way and go back to screaming about Elon Musk all day. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put forth a counter argument to that point, though, because I do think we shouldn't underlook the rise in scientific literacy that we've seen among the general public in the last few months. I feel like just with the way that COVID has been in the news and the tremendous personal interest that everyone has in vaccine development here or in a development of a treatment for COVID-19, people have just picked up so much kind of information that they wouldn't otherwise have about how all of this works. And if you had asked the general, a member of the general public with no connection to biotech what R0 is, a year ago, there's absolutely no way. And now people are debating this fluently, with friends and family and on unrelated internet message boards. And so I think we should remember that there has been this enormous growth in interest and literacy around drug development in the general population. And it's hard to imagine that won't go somewhere. Maybe it might not mean day traders will stay in this sector, but I think that energy is going to have to go somewhere.
Have we seen Dave Portnoy trade biotech stock yet? I don't think so.
I try to live in a universe. I have not tracked Dave Portnoy.
You live in a non-Barstool world?
To the best of my ability.
Yeah, okay. I don't think that Dave Portnoy or the Barstool crowd has picked up on a biotech stock yet. Certainly, we've seen some in the Robinhood world, which I guess sort of, if you're doing a Venn diagram, those sort of probably overlap. And we've seen some of sort of the Robinhood. If you track, the stocks that are popular on that app, there are a good number of biotech stocks in there. And we'll see what happens. I feel like traders go where the stocks are hot and where stocks move. And right now, biotech seems to be the flavor. I don't know, flavor of the month or flavor of the season. I don't know if that's necessarily going to always be the case, but for now, it certainly makes things interesting.
Well, I have a question for you, Adam, along those lines. I've been seeing more and more on bio Twitter about Robinhood. It just seems to be coming up in conversation a lot more. Yeah. Could you give us the 30,000 foot view of what how this app is kind of being used to trade biotech stocks and what the implications are?
I mean, I'm sort of new to it too, and Damien, you might know more about it. I don't know if you know any more about it than I do. I mean, it's a free trading app, right? And I think it sort of makes it's not the only way to freely trade stocks, biotech or otherwise, but it sort of it definitely markets itself to a younger generation of traders, and also markets itself, or the app itself is a little bit emulates a little bit of like gameplay. It has that quality to it of like a video game quality to it, which I think has attracted a certain number of people. I mean, the downside and the risk is you get people in there who don't know what they're doing, and who think that in this market right now, where basically the Fed is backstopping everything in the economy and on Wall Street, so that there's this feeling that basically stocks only go in one direction, which is that way, that you can't lose. And I think that people who have been around a long time know that that is not the case. And I think, I don't know if you guys saw, there's a recent sort of tragic story in the past week or so of somebody, I think he was maybe 20 years old, who got sort of very deeply in debt trading some fairly sophisticated, complex option strategies that maybe he didn't quite understand what he was getting into. And the app, it seems like maybe was giving him some mixed messages in terms of how much, whether he was losing money or not. And he committed suicide. And that is a tragic story, but is also a warning sign and of something that people should pay attention to. I think, that it's not a game. There's a lot at stake here, and you have to be really careful about what you're doing. All right, here's a question. So one of you guys can answer it. What percentage of your time is covering pandemic-related topics today versus maybe the start, I guess maybe, the beginning of the year or pre-COVID? How do you see it waxing or waning moving ahead? So yeah, how much time are you or we spending on this thing?
Yeah, so there's definitely a period where it was like 100% explicitly COVID stories. And now I would say my coverage has shifted back towards mostly health tech, with some COVID still kind of thrown in. But at the same time, I do kind of like reject the idea that there's a COVID story versus a non-COVID story, because I think in this era, all stories are touched by the pandemic. Even if it's about a subject that nominally has nothing to do with COVID, just working on it in this era, whether it's a company or a university or a person you're profiling, their life is so shaped and their work is so shaped by the pandemic that you can't avoid it. One example is I'm working on a story right now about the use of AI in the clinic in a certain application, and it has nothing to do with COVID, like absolutely no connection on its face. But that project was at one academic institution put on hold during the COVID-19 era. And so that's just, sort of a way that this AI story that on its face has nothing to do with COVID has become a COVID story. I don't think you can draw a sharp distinction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like it still does feel like 80-20 to me, but accounting for the fact that even a run-of-the-mill story about, for example, a clinical trial on a non-COVID thing, at some point there will be a paragraph or multiple paragraphs about how one runs a clinical trial during the time of a pandemic. But I'm still very much in the world of writing about new ideas to treat COVID-19 or vaccines that might prevent it in the first place. So it's still, I would say, the majority of like my mental space.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about the podcast, guys. I mean, I think, from like March, I mean, we were doing basically like all COVID podcasts, weren't we, for a while? It was, and we do we have multiple topics, right? Each time we do a podcast, but it was like, that's all we were doing. And I now feel like we're still doing, I think it's rare that I don't know if we've done a podcast that hasn't at least had one segment that's COVID related, but like we're starting to do some that are, not, right? Kind of trying to get back to, because I do think that I do sense that, and maybe somebody can chime in. I'd like to hear from people, like either raise your hand or in the queue. Like, how do you feel about the media coverage of COVID-19, or just in particular STAT? I mean, we've spent a lot of time at STAT, obviously writing about the coronavirus and COVID-19. We've been trying to do other things and get back to kind of normal reporting. But how do you guys feel about it? Let us know. I mean, I'm curious because I personally feel, I've gotten a little fatigued reading COVID-19 stories, and I yearn for the days when I can write other things. And when I do write non-COVID stories, I actually enjoy it. It seems getting back to normal. So somebody raise their hand and let me know how you feel about that, and whether we're spending too much time on COVID-19 stories or whether we're spending the right amount of time.
Unfortunately, the virus does not share our fatigue with this coverage.
No, it does not. It does not. All right, Jeffrey Lazar, hello. You're on our screen here. What's up?
I'm going to have to get my mic just a second.
All right.
Okay, you can hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, I'm answering your question about the fatigue level.
Yep. What do you think?
My fatigue is extreme.
Mm-hmm.
This is like we're devoting an amount of time and electrons on the screen and in the print media disproportionate to the story right now.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of management by press release. You've talked about that a little bit earlier. It's not even a good press release that we're dealing with. My fatigue is substantial. That's it. Substantial. End of comment.
No, I appreciate your comments, and I feel like you're probably, I don't know, Damien, Rebecca can chime in. I feel like you're probably not alone. I think it's probably a natural reaction to have. I mean, months and months and months of the same thing. People, you're gonna start to get tired of it, even though, like Rebecca said, the virus doesn't care whether we're tired of it. But thanks, Jeffrey. So here's a question, guys. One of our favorite topics. Looking into your crystal ball, will there be an in-person JPM 2021? Would any of you go in person? And if it's virtual, what impact will it have on the way you report on this bellwether financial conference?
So my prediction is that there will not be an in-person JPM. I just can't imagine a gathering of that size being a good idea. Like, the trade-off here is, like, best case scenario, you get a normal networking conference. It's better. People are able to hash out more deals, have better meetings, higher quality meetings than if it's done virtually. But the downside is, you could literally kill someone or kill tons of people. This is just not a trade-off that is worthwhile for any conference organizer. And I think JP Morgan recognizes that.
Yeah, I agree with that. My first thought would be that if you can count on a large financial institution for anything, it is to want to make money, and thus the conference would go on. But then probably if you can count on a large financial institution to be anything, it's conservative and risk averse when it comes to the potential legalities of anything. And so I think having seen the super spreader event that was the Biogen conference in Boston, or meeting in Boston in March, that it just wouldn't be worth it. Whoever the general counsel who was advising anyone planning this, I assume that conservatism would prevail and they'll cancel it. And as to what we'll lose if it's virtual, I think this is something that I think is dawning on us all gradually about, missing human contact. But the various medical meetings, Adam, I know you covered ASCO. I mean, there is just no real way to replicate the happenstance and serendipity of running into someone in the hall. And JP Morgan is such a yardstick for people. There are people I know who I consider them people I know, but if I think back, I only know them by meeting once a year in San Francisco. And, we could schedule a Zoom or whatever, but it subtracts what, at least to me, is 80% of the value of the meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there will be at JP Morgan 2021. I just, like Rebecca said, it's hard to imagine a meeting at that time of the year. You know, you're talking about the winter time, where you're already like kind of into flu season. I can't imagine it happening. I can't imagine, think about the liability or the risk that large publicly traded companies they're not going to want to put their management teams in rooms with large groups of people or in small spaces with continually rotating groups of people. I mean, you think about it, you know, the sort of the behind, the, you know, the stuff at JP Morgan that you don't see are the nonstop one-on-one management meetings between, you know, the company's management team and investors, right? That's kind of the little engine that sort of runs everything. And those meetings literally like just keep occurring, right? It's like every half hour, there's another meeting in small hotel rooms. That is not going to happen. No, I mean, no publicly traded company is going to put their like high-powered, high-paid CEO in a room like that. So I think from that perspective, like there's just going to be not going to be a meeting. And so what will the impact would that be? And I agree with you, Damien. I feel like it will be it'll be reduced to like just another virtual meeting that will not have the same impact, because you're right, that sort of serendipitous meeting up with people, the networking. I mean, that's the thing that sort of fuels, that's the reason why people go to San Francisco, right? Everyone is there. Who are you going to run into at a cocktail party, whatever? Yeah, we'll wait.
One of the stories we've been covering in the past couple years is this kind of JPM exit movement, which is a growing sense, and this was even way before COVID, that this meeting is just not worth the cost. It's not worth the hassle. People are some people were staying home from JP Morgan in 2019 and in 2020 because they just didn't see kind of a worthwhile trade-off for their company in, you know, schlepping out to San Francisco for a week. And I think combining that with some of San Francisco's, social issues and the challenges around homelessness and drug use in that neighborhood. So I'm curious what you guys think. You know, if there's a year, which it very much seems likely it will be, 2021, where nobody goes to JP Morgan and, you know, a company finds they're still able to do deals, you know, revenue is still, consistent or reasonably flat or even up. What incentive is there to go back in 2022? Could this be the year that the meeting shrinks? Even if we have a treatment, I don't think we'll necessarily have a vaccine by 2022, but we might be back to kind of pretty normal lifestyle in 2022. Could this meetings days be as it is now, as we understand it, as this massive meeting of thousands of people?
Yeah.
Could that be the end?
I mean, I think there's two ways to look at it, and they're a little bit they're sort of diametrically opposed. I mean, on the one hand, I think people will so miss the interaction and sort of the things that go on that, like, as soon as they have the meeting again, more people might go, right? That you sort of like, there will just be like this pent up demand to go, and people will do it. But on the other hand, like you said, I think we're all learning a lot about what we can do and what we can get accomplished by working remotely, right? We all work remotely. We've been doing that since March. It hasn't really affected the way Stat operates. A lot of companies are realizing that. In the biotech world, you're seeing a lot of deals still get done, despite the fact that people are doing it over Zoom. So, that's the other side, that like, maybe, like, you're right, maybe people will be like, I don't need to do these. I don't need to go to San Francisco to have these meetings. I can do it remotely. And so therefore my days attending JP Morgan are over. Yeah. And I don't know which one wins out.
Yeah, I could see it being a mix for different people that, to your point, we've realized how much we can do without in-person, but we've also realized the limitations of non-interpersonal business doing. And so that could actually just like stoke demand for something like JP Morgan. But at the same time, whether 2022 or even beyond, I feel like the psychic harm we've all been done. Like when I picture shouldering my way through a hall at JP Morgan and there's just faces and bodies everywhere, it's unimaginable to me. It feels like a different reality. And it also is like panic inducing. Like it's like the subway, for example.
No,
and
I mean, guys,
I
think
thought my way out of
about
that
it.
by 2021. I don't know.
I mean, think about it. We were just out there. I mean, January seems like 10 years ago, doesn't it? I mean, doesn't it seem so long ago that we were all together, you know, going to these parties, doing the things on our own workspace, having our own events where literally you were, you know, like this, right? Trying to get by people. And we were doing that literally on the cusp of this. I mean, who knows? Maybe the virus was already in San Francisco. I don't know. I mean, like, you know, there's disputed ideas about when it first showed up, but like it was soon after that, right? And we were all doing that in those rooms. And like Damien said, it is sort of panic inducing to think about that today.
It is a little funny to look back. I mean, funny in a kind of sad and unfortunate way to look back at all the predictions that people were making for the year ahead in 2020. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of JP Morgan, right? It's to kind of chart out the agenda for the industry in the coming year. And like literally nothing ended up happening the way people had expected. You know, sure, clinical trials for other conditions are continuing, but like they have been so shaped by this pandemic. You know, I think even Biogen, which continues to be one of the biggest stories in biotech, with aducanumab and its regulatory fate. You know, we see Biogen in the headlines, you know, in March for the kind of infamous super spreader event. And that was never what anyone expected Biogen's kind of big moment in the spotlight to be.
Yeah. All right, guys, another question here. And this relates to, you know, biopharma's efforts to develop medicines, vaccines against COVID-19. Do you think biopharma gets a better or worse reputation after the COVID-19 crisis?
I would lean toward better, but I feel like it's just inevitably going to be mixed because the drug industry doesn't do anything monolithically. Like even to this point, I think the efforts to develop vaccines have been a net like Q-score positive. That's probably the wrong phrase, but for the industry. But you know, we see all the time kind of fly-by-night press releases and seeming pump and dump schemes by smaller companies at the same time that Johnson & Johnson is promising to develop its vaccine on a nonprofit basis during the pandemic. And so I feel like you will see a usual suspects of perceived good actors like J&J, for example, and probably Gilead if they keep to their word, which it seems like they would. But there will be some ersatz Martin Shkreli to spoil the party, and he or she will get lots of headlines, and there will be House hearings, and I don't know. I feel like we're going to get more of the same in a lot of ways, just amplified because the stakes are so high during a pandemic.
That sounds right to me. I also think the reputational impact is going to be really contingent on sort of the rollout of treatments and or a vaccine for COVID-19. You know, if this is something that people are able to access, and you know, it's not something that people are going bankrupt or facing huge bills to get access to, I think that'll be, you know, a very good thing for pharma's reputation. On the flip side, you know, if this is having huge financial impact on patients, that's going to sink the industry's reputation in a way that, you know, even previous scandals over other medical conditions haven't done, because this is so universal and so in the spotlight.
You know, big picture, Rebecca, I have a question for you, because I mean, I think it's, you know, it's clear we spend a lot of time, there's a lot of focus on what sort of traditional biopharma are doing in COVID, developing medicines, vaccines. But what about your world? What about health tech? What about Silicon Valley? How is it today different from what you're hearing about what things are going on there versus in the pre-COVID world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest narrative in the kind of Silicon Valley tech giants world and over the past couple of years has been, you know, very uniformly negative. It's been this endless parade of privacy scandals, of scandals over user data, lots of suspicion, both on by regulators, as we've seen with some of the antitrust action and some of the hearings that have hauled Mark Zuckerberg and his ilk before Congress, as well as from everyday citizens. I think there's some distrust. And I think the pandemic has been a real moment for the tech industry to potentially step up. I think there were a lot of announcements back in March about sort of what various companies were doing, and lots of task forces and commissions and collaborations. And I think there was a lot of excitement about kind of what this could do and how this could transform our understanding of the role of big tech companies. But at the same time, contact tracing hasn't really taken off. There's the kind of Apple, Google collaboration that's gotten a lot of interest. But I think whether that is actually adopted and whether it has a meaningful impact on containing the spread of the virus has yet to be determined.
The one thing I was going to say reputationally, for the sake of the drug industry, if I were Moderna, or to a lesser extent Johnson & Johnson, what would kind of keep me up at night is that even if I do everything right, my vaccine works, I donate enough of it to where everybody likes me, I just hit all the checklists of what we want drug companies to do, I will be relying upon the federal government to actually disperse it. And so, as we've seen with the remdesivir situation, the federal government is not great at doing things nowadays. And so there's a huge risk that you will take some sort of reputational hit that you had nothing to do with. I think Gilead has been insulated from that because they made very clear the handoff and all of that. But, Rebecca, to your point, if the vaccine is not widely accessible, whether that be by virtue of cost, or even if it's free, if it's not getting distributed to communities that need it, that can make the drug industry look bad, and there's a chance that it wouldn't even be their fault to begin with.
So somebody wants to know our thoughts on how soon we'll have a vaccine.
Yeah, so I've been getting this question from friends and family, and they always think I'm like wildly pessimistic. But like, how could there possibly be a vaccine before, in distribution before January 2021? Like, even the manufacturing and distribution, even the logistics challenge is enormous. Like, the number of people that need to be vaccinated, I can't imagine, on top of the fact that we need to see these proven in clinical trials to be safe and effective. I just can't imagine having a vaccine.
Tony Fauci, even today, speaking in front of the House committee today, said again, that we'll have one by the. It's not. I think it was like it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But he was like, it's going to be beginning of the year. There will be a vaccine. So, I mean, I guess the question it comes down to. And we touched, I think we sort of touched upon it in this week's or last week's podcast, the last podcast that we did when we had Zeke Emanuel on. It's not a question of like the ability to have a vaccine. It's more how good is the vaccine, right? Like, I mean, you can throw anything out there, right? But is it going to be meaningfully effective and safe? I mean, obviously safety is so important when you're talking about something that you potentially are going to give to millions and millions of people. And that's the question, I think, and it's sort of the thing that people don't really consider because there may be one and it just may be marginally effective. And in the beginning, maybe that's enough. And you can argue that, whether that's right or wrong, but that seems to be where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also this kind of widespread perception that once we have a vaccine, it's game over, pandemic is done. Mm-hmm. And as our colleague Helen Branswell has covered, I think in great detail and really strong reporting, that's not the case. It may very well be, even in a best case scenario, a lot like the flu, where the flu vaccine doesn't mean you don't get the flu, doesn't mean that the flu doesn't circulate. It just might mean that there are, sort of less severe symptoms. And that would be a huge win, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same as game over, we're back to normal life.
Yeah. The thing I find myself pointing out in conversations with people is just like the importance of the word novel in novel coronavirus. Not only like we're just learning how long antibodies stick around in the plasma of people who've been infected. We don't know what level of antibody confers protection, if that's even the right thing to be looking at. We don't know the extent to which the vaccines in development actually create these antibodies, because we're dealing with like vague numbers there. There's just so much that we don't yet understand that one would want to understand before saying something like we will have a vaccine in a year, that yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable putting a hard timeline on it whatsoever. And I'm always a little confused when people who don't have a fiduciary stake in doing so do feel comfortable with that, because I mean we have no idea.
Right, and here's a related question, and I'll pose this to you, Damien. So if the traditional vaccine approaches prevail, if they are the first ones to come out, the traditional ones, versus the newer methods, i.e. mRNA, Moderna. Do you think, this person wants to know if you think that the market and investors will lose interest in these newer vaccine technologies if they're not the first ones out of the gate for the COVID-19 vaccine?
Maybe. I guess what I would say is that if it turns out that the likes of Sanofi or Johnson & Johnson win the race in terms of having whatever society defines as an effective vaccine, I think the perception of Moderna will turn on just what the data show from Moderna's vaccine. I do think people are patient. I think they know that this is all pretty newfangled stuff. If it's a matter of the Moderna vaccine appears to work, but just not as well, I think that's something the company could spin and say, well, we have all these other programs and we're learning as we go, and et cetera. If there's a serious safety issue, which there hasn't been to date, or something else that suggests that the platform itself that Moderna is working on is inherently flawed in some way, I think that would probably be disastrous for the company. But as they point out, they have done phase 1 studies in other infectious diseases and have a phase 2, I believe, in another. So that seems unlikely. I feel like the more likely thing is that it just turns out to not be as effective as older technologies, and the saga of Moderna just continues right along the way it has.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll take a couple more questions. Here's one. How do we see the trend for recruitment in the biotech industry as people's behavior has changed and become suspicious? I'm not exactly sure what that means, but what do we think about recruitment?
I think, well, as a technical challenge, I mean, I don't recall now, but I think we're expecting there to be 4 concurrent phase 3 vaccine trials in this country, or at least from companies predominantly enrolling in this country, beginning by the end of the year, and each one seeks to enroll 30,000 to 50,000 people. So it just gets to be orders of magnitude of like a difficult challenge, and there's the well-documented problem, and problem is not the right word, but there's the well-documented issue that we've seen in China, for example, where as case counts dissipate, it's difficult to enroll trials. And for vaccine trials, that complicates things a little bit, because vaccine trials enroll healthy people, obviously, but you want is maybe not the right word, but ideally you're enrolling a population that has a somewhat significant risk of getting the virus, because otherwise you won't be able to determine whether it protected people. So I think the issue is going to be almost kind of like a whack-a-mole situation for these companies of trying to police where they're enrolling and opening sites and shutting down sites depending on the epidemiology.
Well, right now, Texas, Florida, and Arizona seem to be like pretty good spots for enrolling people in vaccine trials at the moment.
One of the questions around recruitment that I think is an important one, particularly with some of the treatments, is like, these trials are not just enrolling anybody who has COVID-19. They're enrolling people who are like hospitalized, inpatient, hospitalized for COVID-19, or in some cases, people who are actually ventilated. And that is a pretty small fraction of all the people that have COVID, especially as I think the demographics of infection are shifting. We've been seeing in Florida, in Texas, as the pandemic has continued, the age of people getting infected is trending younger. There are a lot of young people, maybe the people that are going out to bars, people who are maybe taking some more risks in some cases with going outside, or in some cases, young people that just need to work their jobs in order to, feed their family and maintain a living. And so I think, as the age range shifts, and we're probably going to see fewer, a smaller and smaller percentage of people actually getting hospitalized or ventilated. There could be even more competition to enroll the sickest patients.
And I got a note from the person who asked that question. They were actually asking about job recruitment in the industry, not clinical trials. I think we got that wrong. I mean, to try to answer her question, although I'm not an expert in, employment recruitment in biotech. I mean, I have, and I'm sure you guys have too. I've talked to companies who have, brought on employees virtually. Have done Zoom interviews, job interviews, and done all the HR type of things during these past few months in a virtual way, which is optimistic, I guess, for the health of the industry. I mean, at the same time, these are businesses, and when businesses face economic uncertainty, there is a pullback and maybe, taking a little bit more time to fill jobs. So that probably also is happening in the industry as well.
One thing I was thinking, just in reporting, when you talk to people in biotech and people in medicine, sort of from the generation before mine, a really common thing I hear is that people were galvanized by the AIDS crisis. They knew they wanted to become a doctor because of what they saw. They knew they wanted to get into developing medicines because of how horrific that was in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, it's possible this is a forward-looking recruitment thing, but it's not impossible that this moment, especially if a drug company does come up with a vaccine that ostensibly saves the world, could be good for recruitment in the long term, maybe in the same way that like the moon landing, I think, galvanized kids in the 1960s to, get into aeronautics or mathematics or whatever. So there's that as well.
Yeah, I think it also raises the stakes of how the drug industry's reputation pans out of all of this. I'm sure there are kids who are really inspired by the work being done here, but whether they decide to become an epidemiologist or a drug developer could be shaped by, kind of how the reputation of the industry pans out.
Or a virologist. There might be like way more virologists coming out of this. All right, so we're going to end here. Maybe we'll end it just with, when we started, we were talking about how things have changed for us. Let me ask you guys, have either of you guys you're both in, Damien, you're in New York, Rebecca, you're in San Francisco, I'm in Boston. I think all these places have started to reopen a little bit, right? You guys are all, any of you guys gone out to eat yet?
I've eaten outside. I haven't gotten like full service, being attended to by a waiter, but I have like gotten takeout food and eaten it outdoors, which is, not quite going to a restaurant, but that wasn't something I was doing in March.
Yeah, we began phase 2 just yesterday. So they are now legally serving people outside, which some businesses had been doing anyway. Mm-hmm. I haven't yet. I don't feel an overwhelming urge to do so. Mm-hmm. I did get an email from the place where I get my haircut that they have sort of provisionally reopened with all sorts of protections in place, and that is tempting. But then I'm kind of at the same time thinking, like, what risk am I encountering just to get a haircut?
No, Damien, you need a haircut. Go get that haircut, Damien. Go get that haircut. We have eaten out, actually. We have gone out because we're in sort of the latter stages of phase 2 here in Boston. So at the beginning, it was outdoor dining in restaurants. So we actually went out to a neighborhood restaurant, sat on the patio, had dinner, server came, like the whole thing. And it was a beautiful night. It felt great. I mean, it was like I had no anxiety about doing it. Maybe because I was outdoors, servers were wearing masks, blah, blah, blah. And it felt really good. Now, apparently, I guess on just this week, indoor dining has now started in Boston. And I'm not quite ready to like go into, especially, in the city, these restaurants are small. I'm not ready to do that. Like, I will gladly eat outside, but I'm not ready to like jam into a small restaurant yet.
It's going to be a while before I feel comfortable enough to eat indoors or go to a crowded bar. It feels unsurmountably far off.
Yeah, and I don't even know when the next time I'll be going on an airplane. That's just not something I'm going to do. All right, guys. So I think we are done for today. You guys we're finished. We've done this. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found this somewhat entertaining and informative. As you know, we're hosting these Stat Plus conversations every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So put that on your calendar. If you're interested, you can go to our website to check out the calendar of events that we have. And I think next week's, I'm actually looking at my notes here. I'm sorry, guys. Next week's chat is Stats. Our boss, Rick Burke, executive editor, is going to be joined by Pharmalot, i.e. Ed Silverman, to talk about the state of the pharma industry. That should be interesting. And like I said, you can go on our website and sign up. And we'll hope to see you at future events. Rebecca, Damien, it was always good to see you guys. Zoom. I guess we'll be reconnecting in a couple of days to record the podcast.
Yes.
Do we know what we're talking about this week yet? We haven't decided yet, right?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
If anyone in the audience has any ideas, you can always send us an email. readoutloud@statnews.com.
Good plug, Rebecca. Good plug. All right, guys. Thanks very much. See you soon.
Bye.